The crisis in Gaza is now more than 5 months old, with Gazans on the brink of starvation. And with a U.S. presidential election around the corner, some Democratic leaders have started to break ranks with normal policy. Let's listen.
The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the settlers in the West Bank. I have known Prime Minister Netanyahu for a very long time. While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield.
That's New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer giving remarks last Thursday that have started a war of words, so to speak. Here's Netanyahu responding to Schumer when pressed on CNN.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over 1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding.
Schumer also urged Israel to, quote, be better.
He has been too willing to tolerate the civilian toll in Gaza, which is pushing support for Israel worldwide to historic lows. Israel cannot survive if it becomes a pariah. He won't commit to a military operation in Rafah that prioritizes protecting civilian life. He won't engage responsibly in discussions about a day-after plan for Gaza and a longer-term pathway to peace. What horrifies so many Jews especially is our sense that Israel is falling short of upholding these distinctly Jewish values that we hold so dear. We must be better than our enemies, lest we become them.
President Joe Biden said that Schumer made a good speech, but even so, the president seems to be trying to have it both ways, calling for a humanitarian plan in Gaza while maintaining steadfast support for Israel's right to defend itself. The Intercept's Prem Tucker joined us on the show last Thursday, was also pushing Biden's State Department spokesperson Matt Miller on this tension between Biden's stated commitment to humanitarian goals and a new bipartisan deal to cut UNRWA funding through next year. Let's watch.
The U.S. chose to be cautious as it suspended funding to UNRWA for allegations that 12 of its 30,000-person staff, may have been involved in the atrocities on October 7th. And as you described yesterday, that's kind of standard U.S. policy to have this type of caution with all sorts of entities. But, as our colleagues have asked you over the past few months, there have been broad and specific human rights violations that we've been concerned about, human attacks against hospitals and churches, targeting people with white flags, both Israeli hostages and Palestinians, torturing Palestinians, and now, of course, this attack on Henry Rajab's family and then leaving her to die horribly. And so I'm wondering, on all this, you've said we're looking into it and Israel is investigating, but in each of these cases, the U.S. doesn't seem to be as cautious with its money and support as it is with UNRWA. It's to the point that the ICJ and the U.S. court both say Israel may be plausibly committing genocide. Still, U.S. money is coming, while the U.S. shut off UNRWA funding immediately. So I'm just wondering if you could explain that sort of difference.
Let me say there is, I think, a false equivalency embedded in that question between members of a terrorist organization who went out and intentionally killed innocent civilians.
Right,
that is the difference. When you have members of Hamas who participated in October 7th, according to the allegations made by the government of Israel, that I should say UNRWA itself found credible. Those are allegations that UNRWA found credible of people intentionally participating in a terrorist action to murder civilians. That is different than a military campaign conducted in an environment where that terrorist organization hides behind human shields. And so we will continue to engage with the government of Israel about how to minimize civilian casualties. There have been far too many over the course of this campaign, and how to prevent civilians from being killed. But I think they are very different matters for the reasons I just articulated.
Now, this all comes as Israeli negotiators are heading to Qatar today to participate in more ceasefire talks coming weeks after Israel and Hamas had failed to reach an agreement ahead of those discussions.
Yeah, so this tension is growing and growing, and many people on the left in particular have interpreted this pivot that we've seen first with Joe Biden adopting ceasefire language, now with Chuck Schumer coming out and giving the speech last week, putting distance between the administration and Netanyahu in particular, as evidence that the protest campaign is working. But the Biden administration strategy seems to be not changing its policy toward Gaza per se, but basically characterizing all of the excesses of what's going on in Gaza, the huge number of civilian losses, the impending famine and the like, on the right-wing government and Netanyahu specifically. The idea being perhaps that if you can put political pressure on Netanyahu, who is already facing a great deal of it from within the country, that might either influence him or, more importantly, in the short term, create distance between the Biden administration and the worst of what people are seeing online on their phones, on TikTok and elsewhere.
Sure, and it looks like Biden or the White House or whoever's making decisions has almost authorized other Democrats to speak up,
right,
even if Joe Biden isn't really doing it himself, to be like, well, look, Democrats are criticizing this. What more do you want from us? So I frankly think Kamala Harris and Chuck Schumer and other people have been encouraged to make those views known, to ease pressure on Biden to say something along those lines. Specifically with the calls for I agree with you, the focus has been on Netanyahu itself, which frankly can end up being an almost non-ideological criticism, because I mean there are some right-wing people who think Netanyahu should step down because this tragedy happened on his watch, and the reporting on his kind of Pied Pipering Hamas all along has been pretty well established at this point. I think there are people who think that Netanyahu should go for, even people who don't think what Israel's doing should change fundamentally, directionally, don't think Netanyahu's the right person for the job.
And don't forget, he was facing hundreds of thousands in the streets earlier last year over his efforts at a kind of Supreme Court reform that was seen as, frankly, anti-democratic and exactly the kind of authoritarian behavior that we here, or Democrats here, often characterize as Trumpian. And the inconsistencies there, I think, are difficult to reconcile. Now, some other kind of points of fact, new news that emerged over the weekend with respect to this crisis. The debate over UNRWA is still broiling. A Democratic senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, came out saying that there is no corroboration of evidence that the UNRWA employees were involved on October 7th, saying that it's, quote, flat out lies. I thought that was an interesting kind of weighting of an elected representative into that particular battle. And that's on the background of emerging news about the crisis. The head of the EU came out saying that, the EU's humanitarian organization came out saying that this is starvation being used as a weapon of war, which is a violation of international law. That's Joseph Borrell, who came out saying that this is a, quote, man-made disaster. So increasingly there is this international consensus about the scope of the famine that's coming down the pike and the fact that this isn't, in fact, avoidable. And I think we have a SOT coming up, a video coming up from a Democracy Now! Interview in which a guest makes exactly that point.
While it may be possible to bomb a hospital by accident, it is not possible to create a famine by accident.
Meanwhile, World Central Kitchen head Jose Andres said Israel should be doing more to get aid into Gaza. His organization, World Central Kitchen, is working to send aid to the region and has called for more access points to deliver food and humanitarian aid.
We've been trying to bring the hype down from the beginning, because this is a highly complex situation. But right now, yes, we have a boat with a barge with almost 200 tons of food that we're doing this pilot, because it's the first time that anybody is going to be trying to arrive to the shores of Gaza. Still, failure is a possibility, but what we cannot do is fail the people of Gaza. That will be the true failure, is not trying.
So again, you hear this in Prem's questioning also. Why is it that there has been this very quick response to the allegation that 4 out of the 30,000 UNRWA employees were participating on October 7th? There has been an immediate, the day of the ICJ remember, there was an immediate cutting off of America's aid to UNRWA, and a number of other countries follow suit. A number of those countries, including Canada, have decided to reinstate their aid as proof of those allegations has not been substantiated. There have also been allegations that UNRWA staff members were tortured by the IDF to give false confessions as part of that investigation, which is being followed up with now. But in the United States here, we now have a bipartisan effort to say we're actually going to continue stripping our funding from UNRWA through next year. But at the same time, as Prim points out, there have been all of these allegations of wrongdoing by the IDF that have been both narrowly and broadly accused. And the response from Biden's government is to say, well, we're going to ask Israel to look into that without any corresponding abridgment of our choice to fund Israel militarily in ways that are directly contributing to the conflict. And even as we know that Israel is restricting aid to Gaza, so much so that we are now doing this bizarre in-run and building a temporary port off the coast of Gaza. Are those kinds of tensions going to be reconciled by having a couple of senators come out and say, okay, Netanyahu's a bad guy, or are you going to continue to see Biden and VP Harris plagued by protests wherever they go? They can't go to college campuses anymore. Is this really going to put a dent in his ability to get those opinion numbers up as we head into the main meat of this election cycle?
How about a total shutdown of foreign humanitarian and military funding until we figure out what's going on? I think that would be the right way to handle that inconsistency. All right, more Rising up next. Stay with us.